Well, today we are in part 3 of Free to Be Me series. Andrew, in the first session, he looked at the big picture, the God story, and where he enabled us to see ourselves by creation, that we were created in the image of God, and that we are called to reflect and enjoy our Creator in the acceptance and belonging and value that He gives to us. And we draw from that and we celebrate the freedom that is there and of recognizing we're created in the image of God. And we start to live our lives with that perspective. But he also talked about the fact that we are also not only, we need to understand ourselves by creation, but we need to understand ourselves by the fall, where we turned away from God, independent of God. And the result was that we experienced pain and shame and guilt and alienation, where God, instead of being the Father, now all of a sudden becomes a judge. And so we tend to reflect a warped worldview of ourselves, and the worst of all is that we reflect it to one another. It's the damaged world in which we live. And while our hearts long for community and intimacy, there is a disconnect instead. Somebody said, while we are the most connected generation in the history of mankind, we are also the most disconnected in the history of mankind. We have lots and lots of people on social media, but no one knows us for who we really are. And so we tend to allow the perceptions of people that we don't know to impact us and to help us believe a lie oftentimes about ourselves that we often get to live out. And so I'm sure, I hope you join me in this, but we are all walking with wounds. And we tend to medicate them, as Tim shared last week. We tend to medicate them with things and achievements and approval that come from other wounded people. And we pursue stuff, and we pursue the approval of others, and we pursue what we do, and then we are recognized that there is no real freedom in the midst of that. Are you with me? Good. So today we are going to look at discovering the value of the presence of God that releases us and transforms us, brings us joy and freedom, and lifts us above our situations and our circumstances. So I'm going to read a passage to you from the book of Exodus, and then I'm going to give you a New Testament story to help unpack that. I hope that's okay. So Exodus 33, very good. One day Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, take these people up to the promised land, but you haven't told me whom you will send with me." I said, whom you will send or who you will send? Sorry. English teachers here. But you haven't told, you have told me I know you by name and I look favorably on you. If it is true that you look favorably on me, then let me know your ways so I may understand you more fully and continue to enjoy your favor. The Lord replied, "I will personally go with you, Moses, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said, "If you don't personally go with us, don't make us leave this place. How will anyone know that you look favorably on me and on your people if you don't go with us? For your presence among us sets your people and me apart from all other peoples on the earth." And the Lord replied to Moses, "I will indeed do what you have asked, for I look favorably on you, and I know you by name." Moses responded, "Then show me your glorious presence. Show me your glory." Now let me overlay this longing of Moses, asking God to show him his glory, and to understand it through a story in the Gospel of John. The question is, what does it mean to show us his glory? It means to see God as he is, to understand him, to live our lives rightly in the knowledge and in the understanding that we are in fact created in the image of God. And then oftentimes when we run out of everything, we go to the source of real joy and find our place and our value and our acceptance and our sense of belonging in the glory and the goodness of God who reveals himself to us. So, John chapter 2, familiar story to many of you. I've read this, I've preached on this many times. Today is fresh, I can assure you. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. On the third day. What's the third day? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I wish he could have just said Tuesday. But John didn't. He said on the third day. So when I say on the third day, what comes to your mind? Anybody? Yeah? Resurrection. Did he say that? I'm not sure. Okay. You see, John knew that we would think that, Zoe. He knew that you would think that. But in fact, he not only knew, but he wanted us to think that. Because he is setting the stage for a story. As he says in verse 11, there's a miracle happening here. He says, this miracle points to something much deeper. It is a sign of something deeper of the life that Jesus brings to us. You with me? Beautiful. Verse 2, Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited. Nazareth was about 5 miles away from Cana, where this is happening. And Jesus might have done some carpentry work, who knows, for this family, I don't know. He might have grown up with this family. He might have grown up with the people that were getting married. But he is on the invitation list. And his disciples also are. Not all of them, because this is early in his ministry. Now, I want to very quickly, our weddings, we have a ceremony. The couple go away for pictures. They come back, you have the reception. Reception is over, everybody goes home, the couple go on their honeymoon. Jewish weddings were different. See, Jewish weddings, the rabbi would probably do the ceremony. And then after that, the couple would go away, but they would actually have a tent in the middle of the festivities. And the couple, instead of going for pictures, would go into this tent and do the marriage thing, whatever you want to call it. And then everybody waits, by the way. Honeymoon, kind of awkward. Whistle while you wait. And then eventually the blushing bride and groom come out of this tent. And the party begins. And I'll tell you, it goes on for a whole week. And they know how to party. So the wedding has taken place. The tent thing has happened. The feast has started. And now there's eating and drinking. It's a picture of life, of how we love to live it and to enjoy it. But it is a picture also of our fallen world where we often run out of things. I'll tell you why. Because in verse 3 it says, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. I grew up in an Asian culture and in a shame and honor-based culture that we are. To run out of anything, to run out of wine is really, really, really bad. I wondered when I was growing up why my mother, if she invited 2 or 3 people, she would cater as if she were catering for a regiment. But then when I grew up, I recognized the same thing. You see, to run out of wine is a black mark on the family for generations. Because as soon as the wine runs out, everybody goes home. And then the whispers start. Shh, that's the family that ran out the wine at their wedding. And they hear that week after week, after month, after year. And Mary figures that they have run out of wine. So she mentions it to Jesus. Please know, she's not asking Jesus to do anything. She's just mother and son conversation. She's just making an observation, a concern that has a level of compassion to it. She is deeply concerned for this family and for their reputation. Verse 4, Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? Why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." Now, many times I've read that and thought, Jesus is pretty ticked off. He's annoyed. He's rebuffing his mom. What are you talking to me for? I mean, we have that in our families, don't we? We love to get on with our moms and we love to react to our mothers as well. Why are you bothering me with this? It's not my time. It's like he doesn't care any less. No, I want to suggest a different tone. See, woman is a very respectful word. And Jesus is saying, "Woman, why are you involving me?" And I reckon he had a smile, he had a smirk on his face. "Mom, why are you telling me this, Mom? I mean, my time hasn't come yet, and my time means the cross in the Gospel of John. Which means Jesus is saying, I still have some time to do something about this problem. Do you get it? Are you with me? I hope I'm. In other words, and so he's not saying it's not my problem. He's saying it is not a problem. Why do I understand it like that? Because Mary's immediate response to the servant is, do whatever he tells you. If he had rebuffed Mary, she would not have said that. But she saw the grin on his face. Why are you asking me, Mom? I have time. And she says, do whatever he tells you. I was ironing my pants this morning and this thought came into my head. Jesus is never reluctant with his presence to bless. He's never reluctant. Moses said to God, "How will anyone know that you look favorably on me and on your people if you don't go with us, if you don't help us?" Verse 6, nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. A bit of background very quickly. In the homes in those days, they had what was called a mikvah. M-I-K-V-A-H. It was an outdoor pool with some steps going down to it. And next to the mikvah were these huge big jars, gallons, that were filled by the servants. And what they would do is they would tip them into this little mikvah, into the pool. And the owner of the house would go into the water and he would ceremonially cleanse himself and he would say his prayers. If you were a devout Jew, you do it once a week. If you were a very devout Jew, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. So the servants knew about filling those jars. Maybe some of those jars might have been half filled, 3/4 filled. They were still ready to pour into that. And here's a scene. They run out of wine. People are about to leave. Mary says, do whatever. And the servants think that Jesus is preparing for a ceremonial washing for himself. But that is not his intention. Verse 8, then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. And they did so. The way it worked was normally they served the best wine at the start, and when they had run out, they would serve the worst wine, because when people didn't know Arthur from Martha, they couldn't tell the difference between the good stuff and the bad stuff. Jesus flips it on its head, as he always has a way of doing. The bad wine, the wine was given first, but now the best wine that anyone had ever tasted is given last. Jesus had just performed his first miracle. Verse 11, this is what catches it together. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which, catch this, he revealed his glory. And his disciples believed in him. Moses said to God, I will not go unless you bless me, show me your glory, and God did. Here Jesus shows the same glory by his presence. And he does it in the mundane, in that place of lack, of shame, of need. He does it in the midst of life. And this wedding is on the brink of catastrophe, unable to cope with the demands of life, just like we all face. What does Jesus do? He changes water into 1,000 bottles of Merlot, of the best Shiraz you can ever have. It's his first miracle, and he does it to reveal his glory and his beauty and his magnificence. And life is transformed, and the community is transformed, and the wedding is transformed by the presence of Jesus. Do what he tells you. It's where Jesus meets us in our place of inadequacy, and he reveals his glory. You know, it was much more than saving a family, because it is a sign. It's pointing to something significant. So what is this sign? I'm glad you asked. I just read your minds. In the Old Testament, the abundance of wine is symbolic of God's presence, of God's favor, of God's blessing. It comes with his glory and with his favor. And so when there is a scarcity of wine, it is an indication of the lack of God's blessing and the lack of God's favor among the people. And so in times of exile, when they struggled, there was no wine in a spiritual sense. And so what did they do? They looked forward to the prophets who talked about when Messiah comes. So Joel says the vats will overflow with new wine when Messiah comes. Amos says the days are coming when new wine will drip from the mountains and flow from the hills. And Isaiah says, on this mountain, the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples and the finest of wines. And Jesus knew that they knew that wine was a sign of Messiah coming among them. So his first miracle was to make the wine flow and to make it available to us through his presence. The psalmist says, in your presence is fullness of joy, at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. And the steward said, you have kept the good wine to the last. If you go back in the history of the Jewish people, there were times when the wine did flow. Moses, in Exodus 3, my presence will go with you. The wine was flowing, the wine of God's presence. Under David, under Solomon, the wine flowed. But then there was the exile, and there was the 400 years of silence when no wine flowed, not a single drop. And now Jesus shows up, and the steward confesses, you have kept the best wine for the last. The wine that is the best, the wine of his I will be with you presence. And it's yours and it's mine to taste. Most importantly, Jesus does not just turn water into wine. He turns ritual purification water into wedding wine. He turns ritualistic water into relational wine. He takes the ordinary and he turns it into the extraordinary. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Jesus does that? Takes the ordinary, the mundane, and changes it and transforms it. So there is no more mikvah, day after day, week after week. There is no more cleansing, and not being clean. There is no more, I'm trying to do everything right and correct and in order. And no. There is transformation in his presence, and there is freedom in his presence. Augustine said, love God and do whatever you want. Love God and do whatever you want. My third and last point, if I had any points somewhere, there is purpose in God's presence. Jesus said, I am going to use these pots for something very different. I'm going to use them not just for the household. I'm going to use it for the community that are there at the wedding feast. And I'm going to take these ordinary pots and I'm going to put wine into them. You thought I was going to have a ceremonial bath. You thought you were going to have a ceremonial bath, but not with me. Because I have a new purpose for your water pots. I will fill you with new wine to overflowing. So my purpose to make you a blessing to others will be fulfilled. And so we walk in that blessing that comes from enjoying the presence of God, the image of God, accepted, belonging, valued, and capable. That's the image of God in us. Somebody made a statement, it is ours to fill the pots with water. It is Christ's to make it wine. All we do is make ourselves available. We cried out in that song that we sang today, wanting to know God for who He is and to understand Him. And today we don't come asking, have I done enough? Am I clean enough? Am I kosher enough? Have I done right? Have I ticked all the boxes that I need to tick to be accepted? Because when we do that, we punish ourselves and we add to the guilt and the shame with which we live. Today we come simply responding to His invitation to come just as we are. And He says, come and sit at my table, at my banquet, at my feast, and drink of the wine that I will give you. And when you have drunk from it, you will be changed and transformed by it. But the transformation is not just to keep it for yourself. It is so it will flow into your world wherever God has planted you. So we run the race, looking to Jesus, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despised the shame, took the shame upon Himself. And He's seated at the right hand of God. Paul says that as we behold Him, as we take a long, hard look at Him day by day, We are changed from what? From one degree of glory to another. And we're changed and transformed as we live in His presence. And God gives us the privilege of fulfilling His purposes, not just for us, but for generations to come. What a joy, what a privilege, what freedom, as we see and behold His glory.